Вона собі шоколадку купила, гадіна. З'їла сама шоколадку. А я що робить? А що, мені дивиться, як вона їсть шоколад, я теж, може, хочу шоколад, блін. Задумала, блін, мені дуже шоколад. Я дуже хочу шоколад.
If Sauron crying is more complex and therefore better, I don't want it.
Uh-oh, retard alert! Retard alert, class!
Presenting the short bus veteran! I'm so sick of everyone acting like the villains need to be these deep, complex little crybabies to be interesting. Every time I hear some overhyped loser say, well, actually, the villain's motivations were really layered. No, they weren't. They just slapped daddy issues on a psychopath and called it character development. And people eat this shit up like it's food with absolutely no nutrients in it. Like it's actual dog shit. So today I'm going to be ranting about why the villain doesn't need a tragic backstory to be terrifying. Why evil for evil's sake works just fine. And why sometimes less is more. Unless you want to write a therapy session for every loser villain that nobody cares about. So let's talk Sauron from Lord of the Rings. He's the perfect example of an effective, non-complex villain from a writing standpoint. Sauron is pure evil, a dark force looming over an entire story. He's a black hole sucking everything towards chaos and destruction. This simplicity is what allows the story to stay focused on the hero's journey without getting bogged down in excessive attempts to humanize the antagonist. It's Tolkien saying, here's an unstoppable force of evil, and here's what happens to the people trying to stop it. It keeps the story tight, clear, and thematically sound. Now contrast that with villains like Saruman. Saruman started with a more complex character arc, initially noble, then seduced by power. But what's crucial here is that Saruman's complexity isn't the focus of the narrative. Tolkien didn't waste hundreds of pages exploring every little crack in Saruman's psychology, because that would take away from the real point of the story, the Fellowship's journey and how people respond to absolute evil. If Tolkien had spent more time making Sauron some brooding philosopher instead of a sinister force of evil, the stakes would have felt watered down. When writers try to make every villain complex, it often leads to something I like to call like a moralistic mud wrestling. This is when the story becomes so focused on understanding the villain that it forgets to maintain the urgency of the conflict. Take Voldemort from Harry Potter, for instance. Rowling could have given him a 10 chapter backstory about how he was misunderstood as a child. Instead, we got details that enriched his character without slowing the plot. Voldemort is driven by a clear, ambitious power and immortality, and that makes him efficient as a villain, both in terms of plot progression and narrative tension. Now, here's where it affects writing quality. When you have a simple, straightforward villain, that story maintains a clear thematic core. With Sauron, we know this is a battle against overwhelming evil and corruption. The story then explores how good people struggle to face that evil. But if you try to humanize and over-explain every villain, you muddy the theme. Instead of focusing on the journey and choices of the heroes, you start diving into side tangents about the villain's feelings and motivations. That's not inherently bad, but it's often distracting. And let's face it, distracting storytelling is bad storytelling. This assumption that complexity equals depth is another mistake that writers fall into. Adding more layers doesn't automatically create a more compelling story. It creates more distractions and dilutes the core narrative. Take Game of Thrones, for example, not where the show took us. The Night King's menace came from his simplicity. He's death incarnate, moving towards his goals with relentless determination. The moment the show tried to insert half-baked explanations or some nonsense about a larger connection to Bran, the villain's threat and the writing suffered. The thematic focus of the living versus the death became secondary to the show, trying to justify why the Night King was doing all this in the first place. This also leads to another problem of over-explaining the villain. When writers feel compelled to give villains a deep, emotional backstory, it often ends up coming, forced. Imagine if Tolkien tried to, like, make Sauron this, like, edgy boy that, you know, was a boyfriend of Galadriel, and then he got sad because he just didn't see who he really was. His potential, like, he was potentially maybe not evil. Yeah, that's what we get on Rings of Power, and it sucked. It was stupid, forced, and crappy. It doesn't deepen Sauron's character. It totally undermines the role as a symbol of overwhelming corruption. Villains like this don't need explanations, and sometimes adding one is just a lazy way for the writers to pretend they're adding depth, and that's entirely what Rings of Power was. Another key point, overcomplicating a villain often shifts the focus away from what the story should be about. Fantasy stories are about more than a hero-villain dynamic. They're about larger themes of power, corruption, hope, sacrifice, or whatever. A simple villain lets these themes shine. When Sauron exists as an absolute, we're not concerned with his feelings. We're concerned with how our heroes are reacting to his presence. The looming shadow of Middle-earth. The writing doesn't have to take detours into how does Sauron feel about his role as the Dark Lord, because that's irrelevant to the thematic core. And then look what happens when you prioritize complexity over narrative clarity. Take a look at Star Wars and the mess. Kylo Ren. Kylo Ren's arc. The writers kept throwing in new motivations and emotional turmoil. God, he was such an edgy boy. Trying to desperately make him deep. But instead of feeling layered, he ended up as a mess of conflicting motivations and undercooked ideas. You just could hear, like, these writers patting themselves on the back for creating such a complex villain. But in the end, he just came off as unfocused and inconsistent and, quite frankly, gay and retarded. At the end of the day, writing a good villain isn't about making them complex. It's about making them effective within the story. If the villains serve the theme, raises the stakes, and challenges the hero, then whether they're complex or simple doesn't matter. What matters is the narrative clarity, keeping the story tight, impactful, and focused on what it's actually trying to say. So next time somebody tries to bullshit you about how every villain needs to be complex, or they just like him because he's got feelings now, and how that somehow makes good writing, just remember, not every antagonist needs to be a part of some gay therapy session. Sometimes the clearest path to creating a great story is letting evil just be evil. Because at the end of the day, it's not about whether the villain cries in their downtime. It's about how the hero responds to chaos they create. And hey guys, if you made it this far, I got news for you. You're retarded. But that's just an acknowledgement of every person in this world. But I am in the short bus here to collect all of the retards. So join us, where instead of being some fucking loser retard that's in denial, we're not. And we're just having the best fun over here, and we're cooler than everyone else. Because every seat in the short bus is the back seat. And that makes every seat the cool seat. And also, I have a live show, The Iron Seas. I will put the link in below, where we talk about story writing, we watch movies, and we talk about fun shit. It's the most autistic content, second to this channel, but it's a fun time. But until then, so long, retards.
Moving down the highway.